Hello. In the short clip, I'm going to show how to use SMS 13.4 to create hard bottom datasets for a CMS grid. So in this particular case, I've already loaded a grid that I've created for an area in Massachusetts. And so the first thing that you'd want to do is to right-click on Map Data and add a coverage. So we'll choose New Coverage and then scroll down to Models, and under CMS-Flow, we'll choose Hard Bottom. And so this is done a little bit differently than in the past. So what this does is creates a new coverage for just the hard bottom definition. So we'll create windows of areas that we're going to define hard bottom, and these can be in channels that are open flow, where you have reduction of sediment. That could be the definition of jetties, defining them so they do not erode. So sometimes you might get some overtopping, and if it's not defined as hard bottom, then you would get some erosion over the top of this. And so by using hard bottom, you're avoiding that. And there may be some other areas where you want to provide a little bit different classification. So these are just two quick polygons. I'm going to redo this in a minute and better define these. But you would just want to create feature arcs, make sure that they close on themselves to create a polygon for whatever areas that you want to define. And then you would click this button up here at the top called Build Polygons. Or if you wanted to, you could go under Feature Objects, and there's an option there to build polygons. So either way, it does the same thing. It'll create polygons that can be selected now for these areas. I'm going to bring in a predefined coverage that I've already created, and then move on from there. So here's that. So there are a couple of different options for hard bottom, and so if I select these different polygons, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So when it brings up the dataset tool here, so there are a couple of different options. One is non-erodible cell, one is specified distance erodible cell, and the other is specified elevation erodible cell. And depending on which you want, then you would select that type, and it may have a value that you can add in there. So I'll explain a couple of these. For this first area, I have back here in a little flood shoal area. I'm going to specify that to have a hard bottom designation at a specific elevation. And so I don't exactly know how much sand it is for every cell that's above or below the bottom, but I can specify for this area, I'm going to assume that there's a hard bottom layer at 7 meters below the water surface. And so this is relative to whatever datum you're using. And so this is, for me, in this case, it's mean sea level. So this is 7 meters below mean sea level. And you notice I do have a negative sign here because we are talking about elevations and not depths. And so you put the -7 here, click OK, and then you can move on to some other areas. And so I'll zoom into this area, and I'll select both of these areas that pertain to my jetties. And so I'll click both of those, and you can hold your Shift key after you click the first one to add in the second one into the selection. And then you can right click and choose Assign Polygon Attributes. And for this type, we will use the non-erodible cell. And so that basically tells CMS that whatever the Z value is, or its base elevation, to keep that throughout the remainder of the simulation. So that limits erosion, but it will allow accretion on top of those areas if it actually happens. So we'll choose that and click OK. And the other type are these two, and I'll just click both of these. Actually, I just clicked the one. I'll go back and redo that. I'll do this. Right click, assign polygon attributes. And for this one, we're specifying a specified distance erodible cell. And this is in situations where you might have core samples and you know exactly, hey, I've got 1 meter of sand below what I have in this model as the depth or the elevation. And so in this particular case, you would specify, hey, I've got 1 meter, so you put a 1 here. And this is always relative to whatever the units are for your grid, and for CMS, that's always meters. So this is 1 meter below whatever the individual Z values are for all of these cells. And I'll show what you wind up with in a minute. So once you do that, you click OK, and it applies this. And so you have these different coverages now, but you still don't have a data set. And so what we need to do is find a way to map these different coverages into a big data set that has one value for every cell. And so as a note, if you don't specify a polygon for a specific area, then the cells outside of those known polygons are all going to be assigned as fully erodible. And so if you do have any limited capacity for erosion, then you want to make sure that you have a polygon associated with that. So the step to do this mapping from the coverage to the actual data set is done with a new toolbox that we have up here. We've got the toolbox, you just click that, and now there is a new section for CMS-Flow, and there's one tool in it, and we'll be adding more tools as we progress over the next couple of years. But this is the first one, and so this is the hard bottom dataset tool. You just click this and run it, or you can double click it, and it will open up a new dialog window for you to enter a couple of answer a couple of questions. And so it wants to know what's the grid that you're working with, what is the coverage that you just created for this hard bottom, and so you can choose that, and then you can give it some name, and it defaults to having this name, but if you have something else in mind, you can put that there too. Once you have those all set, you can click OK. Notice on the right hand side there is a wiki page that's linked in to where you can get some more information on what each one of these is and what the parameters do and things like that. So you click OK, it'll go through and it'll run. Didn't take long at all, less than a second. You click OK, and now when we come back, we see our grid over here. We have now a hard bottom data set. And if I turn all these off and just look at the hard bottom, and then you can see what it did for that particular data set. And so if I hover over these areas, you can see at the bottom, it always shows you what the value is for the hover. And so all the blue is negative 999, and that's just our flag saying for all the cells, unless we told it otherwise, we're going to use fully erodible and don't limit the erosion whatsoever. But for the areas where we did make a couple of selections. Like this one, we had a designated depth of -7, or an elevation of -7. So if we hover inside of this, we'll see -7 for all the cells that are included in that polygon. As we move over to the areas that we designated fully non-erodible, because it's a jetty and maybe the toe around the jetty, then you can, I'll just select one cell in here just that you can see the values for the Z and for the scalar value for this data set are exactly the same. So that's just saying that for the hard bottom, it is exactly at the same level as my specified elevation. And that's the same for all cells inside that area. Once we move to our other zones that we specified, hey, I had 1 meter of sand that I wanted to allow to be eroded in this area. Then I can select a couple of cells in here, and you see indeed the depth that I have, or the elevation that I have, is negative 8.8. But the hard bottom depth or elevation, I keep using that word, that hard bottom elevation is negative 9.8. So I have 1 meter of erodibility in this area. And so that's how the hard bottom tool works. Once you're finished with this, just make sure that you link this in with your simulation. So you would have to go down here to your simulation, into model control, pull up the model control dialog, go into sediment transport tab, and at the very bottom is the hard bottom area. You would make sure that this is enabled, and then select that hard bottom data set like so, and then click OK. Once you save your project, save out your files, then you'll be ready to go with this hard bottom data set that you just created. I hope this helps, and we'll be making some other tools or some other clips later on for showing different features. Thanks.